Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Aleph's Operation Subsection against Vanilla Jing, and the scenario is Superiority, which is supremacy with the serial numbers filed off. Now, today's battle report is the subject of a request from not one but two channel supporters. The first was Tristan, who suggested an OSS battle report, but the second, a slightly older request now, came from channel supporter Noble Wizard, who made a request specifically for Operations Subsection with Garudas. Now, he did say Garudas plural, or at least that's what I wrote down. This is a Garudas singular list, but I did do some testing with multiple Garudas ahead of this. Now, the Garuda is a piece this is not a bad topic at all for a battle report. The Garuda is a very interesting piece in N5. And with the 1.1 update to the N5 rules and the subsequent changes to super jump, etc., even if it has technically lost a little bit, in fact quite a bit of overall movement, I think it's actually a more interesting piece. And the reason why I think it's probably more interesting now than it has ever been is that with the 1.1 update changes to super jump, the Garuda's base movement of 8.2 gives it a super jump with jetpack maneuverability of 10 inches. And that is basically the same as vehicles. Now, technically, vehicles can universally jump 11 inches. The Garuda can only jump 10. But the Garuda is on a Silhouette 2 base, which gives it a huge amount more locations it can end its movement compared to the very, very large bases of vehicles, which in practical, if not absolute terms, makes it more maneuverable. And if you are more maneuverable than an aerial vehicle, you are probably the most maneuverable thing in the game. And testing games and this game have kind of borne that out. The extent to which the Garuda can abuse and use super jump is phenomenally astounding. And as someone who doesn't actually personally like vehicles, but does like the potential that they represent, it's a hell of a piece. So let's have a look at this list and see what's going on. The other kind of like raison d'etre for this particular list is just I wanted to approach Operation Subsection kind of from first principles. I know in my head intellectually that there are some very good builds that you can build, for example, around an Asura. And there's a lot of very sound old wisdom about different remote packages, etc., and how you can build the faction. I wanted to just approach them completely from first principles. What if I'm looking at everything in a vacuum without any prior knowledge? What do I find interesting that I want to put in a list, with the only caveat being that there has to be a Garuda? That's a relatively low bar. It's only 25 points for the Spitfire profile. That is the one that in testing performed the best. And so I went on a bit of an explorative journey to kind of see what I could find. And this is the list that I settled up with. And I think you could tweak the groups a little bit. In fact, I might. What I've been finding is that Group 1 has maybe one more order and Group 2 has maybe one less order than it would like in any given turn. So we could flip one of the Lamads into Combat Group 2. But overall, this is a list I'm really happy with. So in Combat Group 1, from the top, we're starting off with Andromeda. She's a piece that I really like in N5. She's not necessarily overpowered for 30 points. You can attempt the over-infiltrate and have a crack with her and see what she does. That is something I will usually only risk in scenarios that have an exclusion zone, and if there's somewhere safe I know I can put her in my deployment zone if she fails. In that case, it can be worth the roll-off. Otherwise, I'd like to just find a good defensive location for her in the midfield, somewhere that she can't be approached without threatening both guard and zapper, which prevents an ARO fork. Like, it's not really a fork because your opponent gets to respond to it, but it presents an ARO threat that very few things can safely approach. Just about anything that can threaten her in close combat that would disincentivize her from using guard, she can just zap her and stop dealing with. So a piece that I really like. 30 points is expensive, but we are not taking pieces like the Asura, so in fact, we've got a fair bit to play with. She's the second most expensive piece in the list. We then have a Haris team of Dakini, Danavis, and Deva Killer Hacker. The Dakini has gone through a couple of iterations, but eventually for SWC reasons, and because it's nice to have a very high burst gun, we've put in a heavy machine gun. Previous versions had a sniper rifle, which 1.5 SWC, but gives you a broader range of targets you can engage. You can engage a tag if you have a sniper rifle, basically. You have access to the armor-piercing rounds, and it's a better ARO piece thanks to double action rounds on the multi-sniper. But the heavy machine gun just goes much better. And we have at least one piece later in this list, plus a whole bunch of hacking, that lets us engage tags in other ways. So Dakini, heavy machine gun, Danavis, and Deva. The Deva is a piece that probably wouldn't really have been on my radar particularly much if I hadn't also been playing ISS. And because I've been playing Imperial Service and it's in Imperial Service and it's the best killer hacker in Imperial Service, I realized I could put it in this list. And in fact, by adding a Deva and a Dakini into a fire team, you have pure bonuses because the Deva counts as a Dakini, so you get the burst bonus both on the Dakini and the Danavis. You do have to do, if you're running this as a link and you do offensive picture play so that the Deva can do killer hacking stuff, you often have to yeet the Danavis out of the list, out of the link in order to successfully do killer hacking stuff. But there's a few different ways that you can do that to make that work in terms of like link positioning, etc. Or you can just voluntarily break the link and reform it. This is a little link team that has performed very well and I like a lot. And it's not really wasting any fat on like, oh, I need a second Dakini in order to have the bonuses. Nope, David takes care of that and is excellent on her merits. We then have two Lamed rebots. Again, in some previous versions of this list, these were net rods. These are really the only order-generating like plebs in the list. They have, now that I have the points in this current version, they have been changed to Lameds because I really want repeaters in my deployment zone. I like net rods, they're very efficient, but I don't have many spare slots in this list, and I have to have the deployment zone repeaters because a large part of how this list defends up close is in hacking, and I want to be able to do things like project supportware onto different remotes, so Lameds are much better. We then have a Shukra Lieutenant, an oldie but a goodie. 24 points these days for a counterintelligence strategos profile is actually kind of just okay. You can get better, cheaper versions of this lieutenant or pretty close to elsewhere, but that doesn't make the Shukra by any means bad. It's still a good piece. It's doing it's doing plenty in this list. It's high utility, happy to have it. We then have the Garuda Spitfire. It has really performed well, and we'll see it perform fairly well in this game. I'm pretty comfortable having it combat jump down. It's only rolling 11s, whatever. I might put sister jump up. If I don't and I fail, as long as I've got somewhere in my deployment zone that it can go, or I will try and use parachutist. That's one of the obvious advantages that it enjoys over vehicles, that ability to wait and pick its moment. So far, I've used combat jump slightly less than I've used parachutist because parachutist is obviously more reliable on a low fizz model. But you have a variety of options for getting it onto the board, including, frankly, just having it deploy normally and using it as a gunfighting piece. For 25 points, you could genuinely do worse, all things considered. We then have a Probot. This list does need a variety of supportware. 14 points is very reasonable. And then a War Correspondent. It's a specialist this ITS season, and it's not too difficult to spend a command token a couple of turns of the game to turn it into a net rod. In Combat Group 2, we have a full proxy package. We have an Engineer and Yardbot, a Proxy Mark II Hacker, and a Proxy Mark V Forward Observer. I don't really need explaining why all these things are good. Each of them individually is excellent. A little bit of an SWC hog. You can't really spend fewer SWC than this if you want to have 3 posthumans. Some versions of this list, if you wanted to cut a few points, you could cut the half an SWC and 30 points to cut the Mark V, but it's very good. It's a roadblock. It's a nice mix of like close-in defense. It doesn't have a template weapon or anything, but it still has to be bypassed, and it's difficult to kill, and it has a flash pulse for longer range engagements. And for 13 points for a model that does not cost you an order if it dies, it is valuable to have in the list. We then have a Zion Rebot with Thunderbolt. And that's one of 2 fairly dedicated hard ARO pieces, along with John Hawkwood. John Hawkwood is someone who I've played against on this channel a number of times. He is very difficult to really efficiently engage. Sometimes you can just get lucky, but often fights against him boil down to, well, I kind of just hope I get lucky. And when he is firing 1 dice and 2 special dice back on Ballistic Skill 13 with Mimetism, he's a touch expensive. Like 36 points puts him comfortably the most expensive piece in this list, but he is one of the most annoying ARO pieces in the game to play against, and the worst case scenario usually is that he is durable enough, even if there is a bad face-to-face roll against him, that he takes a wound, he goes prone. Okay, it's a little bit much to spend on just 1 ablative wound on the first turn, but that's not the worst thing in the world, and he can just crack games open. I have had games where my opponents maybe have not been as foolish as I have been and tried to put good money after bad, engaging him with, say, tags, but I have had people try to fight him with tags and, like, 2 orders later, just decide that that was a mugs game and that they would do something else. So, very good ARO piece. Not invincible, not unbeatable, but just high enough quality that actually sometimes he can just put the game on his back, and that is worth paying the 48 points for, along with a couple of orders. We then have a Motorized Bounty Hunter, Submachine Gun Chain Colt. You don't have that much other close assault in this faction. It tends to do its work with gunfighting and hacking. So having just 1 piece that can run up the guts and do things like kill a Masai Moran, particularly given I don't have Guided in this list, is just worthwhile as an addition. He will usually begin the game linked with Hawkwood and the Bounty Hunter. You may as well, he can join that link. He gives them dodge bonuses, discover bonuses, etc. But usually he will run off with his Impetuous Order. I have had games where he runs off with his Impetuous Order and then I think the better of it and I drive backwards with his Irregular Order, but he rejoins the link if that happens. Otherwise he goes out at some point during the game and does some work. Overall, this is a very nicely well-rounded list. There are multiple pieces in this list that under the right conditions can just carry a game on their back. It doesn't take too much for, oh, this is a game where Andromeda is really good. She's not really good, that's fine. This is a game where a Dakini is really good. He's not good, that's fine. This is a game where the hacking is good. Or this is the game where the Garuda is good. Or this is the game where the posthumans are good. Or this is the game where Hawkwood carries. There are a lot of pieces in this list. None of them is really overwhelming by themselves, but there's just lots and lots of different tools, each of which can, in any given game state, be like, yeah, this is the moment. That is the kind of thing I do really appreciate in a faction, and I think OSS presents it with a list like this, and it's been really fun to play. Now, playing against me for this game is my good friend Chris. Now, full disclosure, you may notice that Chris's list name here includes reference to Panic Room. We're not playing Panic Room. What's the story with that? This was a particular case of Wednesday night game night. I turned up to make numbers, and Chris's opponent had to drop that evening, and so I stepped in to play a game. And he was happy to have photographs taken for a battle report to be put together. But he has made a list for Panic Room. So there are some compromises and some changes to this list that maybe mean that in a scenario like Superiority, which is mostly just Supremacy, there are a few pieces that are perhaps not perfectly efficient. Chris is also one of those people that can never play completely on meta. There always have to be like one or two things that are reflective of him doing something unique and different, and that is wonderful and I cherish it, but just bear that in mind when we're evaluating this list. You will recall probably the last battle report that Chris was on this channel involved Norkias doing some fairly insane things. Now, those insane things are no longer as possible due to a number of changes, good changes, but one of the takeaways from that game was that the long yards Chris was using in that battle report really should be, at minimum, supplemented, if not outright replaced, by Gudan, because Gudan as close defense pieces are just very, very useful. He took that to heart. That's one of the changes that we see in this list. And so this list is presenting not the full 9 yards of camo that Jing can present, but a pretty solid camo shell game. With a few points here and a few points there, you could slot in maybe one more high quality camouflage piece, and a Zencha Mine Layer would be a really obvious choice to really go ham with the camouflage in this list. But as is, it's pretty sound. So what are we playing with? Well, to start with, we've got 2 Gudan troopers with zappers. Good profile. This is a profile. At this point, everyone I think is fairly familiar with how these work and how they work well. Zappers are electromagnetic weapons, and as such, they are very good at stalling out assaults. You can't just walk past a Gudan with a piece that you expect to continue to spend orders. Very solid, and the Gudan are regular, just really good pieces for 12 points. We then have a Liberto. I really like a Liberto in this mix if you can find the SWC, which Chris has, because it's just one more Mimetism 0 piece, which means that it adds a little bit of fog alongside the Gudan with the Mine Layer. A lot of times, if you're playing other factions with access to Liberto, they're serviceable, efficient, defensive pieces, but they're often very easy to tell who and what they are. The Liberto in amongst the Gudan with other camouflage markers that are Mimetism 3 around it actually means the mine can be quite difficult, and the Liberto can be, unless you really like throw the Libertos itself forward, which usually separates it from the Gudan, it can be at least a little bit, it presents some interesting fog. We then have a pair of Zanshi, one of whom is a Lieutenant. This is totally fine. I have tended towards, in my Yuching list, a Lieutenant +1 order Dao Ying, but you are not locked into that. There is nothing wrong with Zanshi. It's like 2 models, 10 points apiece, you get your Lieutenant order. You can still benefit from using an NCO with that, etc. And there is an NCO in this list, albeit not a fantastic one. This is fine, and it's a good compromise to make if you are going heavy into stuff like camouflage. We then have the NCO, which is Crit Cochrane with a Feuerback. Don't take this profile. This is an experiment, something Chris is trying. He has been using other Crit Cochran profiles in other lists, and they have been performing well. He had the SWC, and it's only a couple more points to turn one of the other Chris Cochran profiles into a Feuerback model, which does not actually add any benefit, because he's not good enough with that gun by himself unlinked to use the thing, which means it is just a waste of SWC and points. If you're going to run him as an engineer NCO, okay, maybe fair enough. I think basically all of his profiles are a touch too expensive in vanilla to be really comfortable with, but as a reminder, Chris was taking this list for Panic Room, where he has a little bit more merit because he scores that scenario. So we can forgive him that, but don't take the back profile. Just don't. Just if you're going to run it with a Yowza, which it is in this list, just take the mine layer profile. That does something at least, and it's got an emitter as well. This Cochrane version is bad, and I think we can criticize about Chris's list. Okay, moving on, we've then got a Longya. The Longya remains for me in N5 very strictly it's not what it was kind of profile, and I think the reason for that is that there are firstly, people have learned how to deal with it a little bit more, but it just feels like there are a great many pieces that can just walk in the open through the Longya's line of fire and say, you want to reveal? If not, I'm going to keep moving. If yes, you're dead. There are too many pieces like Tikbalang, for example. A Tikbalang can just walk into the Longyar's line of fire and just dare it to ARO. And if it AROs, it will just blitz the Longyar down and carry on with its existence. And so that means for the Longyar to get value, you need to be doing things like combining it with other elements. Okay, fair enough. You need to be making use of the mine layer. Okay, fair enough. And ideally, you need to be giving it some potential to go active. That is one thing that differentiates a Longyar from something like a Garuda, for example, is that under the right circumstances, it can at least fire off those +1 burst Panzerfaust and +1 burst Flamen Spears. And so even though it is to an extent throwing good money after bad, if you've got an Evo hacker, which this list does, you have at least a little bit of cheeky opportunity to do actual pop-up ambush plays, but you must have two things to do that. Firstly, you need to be able to reload the damn weapons because they consume all of their disposable charges every time they shoot. But secondly, Ballistic Skill 11 is hot trash, particularly with Burst 2, you must have marksmanship. You must have marksmanship to go active with the Longyar, and paying 14 points for a Pangolin if you are just going to buff the Longyar with marksmanship, that's ridiculous. That's too many points. You might as well spend your points in SWC elsewhere. But if you have some use of the Pangolin otherwise, and we can just get a little bit of potential bonus, I do not hate it this much, and we would in fact see the Longyar do something this game. Now, the Pangolin needs to be justified otherwise, and here we're justifying it with a Tiger Soldier. Chris is a perennial Tiger Soldier lover. I think other people in this case would probably reach a little bit more easily toward the Lushing, the shooting star. But a Tiger Soldier, although it doesn't have the extra wound, it does have mimetism and good ballistic skill, and it's cheaper, and it is still a hacker. And although it doesn't have the Lushing's ridiculous firewall, it does have Whip 14, which means it's a better hacker, better specialist in absolute terms, and of course it is cheaper. Not, it must be said, much cheaper. It is 1 point cheaper, but you're getting mimetism and stuff for that into the mix. Again, I think this list at 298 points can afford to take a Lushing. Chris, take the extra wound, get the firewall, land on 15s. Sorry, 14s, 17s with Evo. Like, it's an upgrade, realistically speaking. The combi rifle and light flamethrower is nice, but the Tiger Soldier is fine. If you had to cut a point and you had no other way to cut it, I would be fine downgrading a Lushing hacker into a Tiger Soldier, but this list does not need to cut a point. We then have a Beast Hunter, and it's the good Yuching Beast Hunter. This is a fine profile, actually decent close combat, thanks to the +1 burst explosive CCW, makes the Yuching Beast Hunter one of, in my opinion, the good Beast Hunters. There are two others. Those are the Pan-Oceanian one and the Ariadna one, and the Yuching Beast Hunter, although making full use of that close combat can be a little bit challenging, it's fine for 17 points. In Combat Group 2, we then have a Yanho, which means I like this list already. I am an absolute ho for the Yanho, big fan of that model, and it would run into some interesting engagements in this particular game. But for example, I am playing John Hawkwood, and the Yanho is a very good piece for trying to brute force down fights with John Hawkwood, because it's one of the few models in the game that is not particularly scared of his K1 rifle. And because it's not scared of his K1 rifle, it can just spend the orders, fire off the dice, take those face-to-face rolls until it wins, and there's not actually that many things in the game that can do that. The Yanho is much, much more durable than basically every tag, for example, in that face-to-face roll. So this is a good example of a use case of the Yanho. Excellent piece. If you really need to save points, it's very easy to downgrade it into a Hate armor-piercing heavy machine gun, right? Tactical awareness, cheaper profile, but when you have the points and you want just the very big gun, the durability, the extra burst, etc. on the Yanho, going to burst 5 is significant, very good piece. Weibing Yakong Tactical Awareness is just a mobile sensor bot / tactical awareness piece, etc. Good utility. I feel like we should probably see these in more lists than we currently do. The fact that Weibing, Yakongs, and similar pieces, Pathfinders, etc., do things like just solve from minefields inside zone of control. Just walk up behind a wall, censor away the mines, then deactivate them through the wall. Like all of that stuff, and it's a specialist, and it's a movable repeater. Feels like it's like just solid for 17 points, but often it's something that is cut from lists to make space for other stuff. It's kind of fair enough, I guess, but it would do well, for example, this game. Then the Evo Hacker, the Zensha KHD follows after. This is a fantastic profile. Sorry, HD with Trinity. This is 34 points, isn't cheap, but you just get a totally well-rounded specialist. It's made better by the recent Climbing Plus changes. I do not need to explain why the Zensha is excellent. Hideout KHD, kind of similar. Would be nice to see it linked, but there's too much else going on with this list to easily find something to link it with. But it is still a burst 3 boarding shotgun with a ballistic skill 13 pitcher, which means it's one of the few pitchers in the game that you can fire off shots without special die and be reasonably comfortable in them landing. Then a Shaolin Monk. Cool. Overall, definitely a list that could use a little bit of optimization. We're going to forgive most of that because Chris bought this expecting to play Panic Room. And so with the sole exception of dunking very heavily on Crit Cockram and suggesting that maybe that Tiger Soldier should be exchanged for a Lushing, otherwise this is a pretty sound Yuching list. If I was going to change some stuff, yep, I would probably swap Cockram straight out for a Hater unit AP heavy machine gun, and boy howdy, that is an improvement. Swap the Tiger Soldier for a Lushing, and then you've got like 4 points, 5 points to spend, 4 points to spend because you cut the Yao Zhao. Do something interesting with that and you have yourself a perfectly serviceable list. Now, on with the game. In a rare show of events, I won a lieutenant role. That doesn't seem to happen particularly often. Now, for 2 reasons, I elected to set up second on the right side of the table, as you see here. The first reason is that this is Superiority, which is a supremacy-style game, which means you have 3 successive turns of end-of-round scoring. That is a situation in which the person going second does have a material advantage if they can survive attacks. And I was pretty happy to try and test the defensive chops of this list against a Yuching attack, and then play for multiple turns of scoring. The second reason is that the last time Chris and I played was the Norkai's game. And I went first in that game, and Chris basically didn't get a second turn, or first turn. And I didn't really want a repeat of that, not that I expected to be able to against a good Yuching list, and Chris's list, now that we've seen it, absolutely is capable of defending, so I feel like this was the better choice, but that did inform my decision at least a little bit. So in terms of Chris's deployment, he has basically thrown down a little team in a relatively safe position here. They're nicely covered from my deployment zone, so he can kind of deploy them like this. The Weibing Yao Kong has tactical awareness on its merits. In this scenario, you get to pick a key operator. That's going to be Crit Cockram. So there are 2 tactical awareness orders and an irregular order on the Shaolin Monk in order to relocate all of these units individually if needed, which means that this kind of deployment, which often is a bit of a nightmare, all of these units are going to be moving anyway, and they are all safe from my deployment zone. So this is not an insensate deployment in this case. Chris has not taken leave of his senses. All of these things are always going to be moving. But we do have the Weibing, Crit Cockram, and a Shaolin Monk. The Yan Ho is the reserve drop, and it's going to cause me a mischief, but we will see it come down on this rooftop over here. The 2 Zanshi are behind this building and then in this little nook back here. I will never touch them for the entire game, but the decoy, I would probably, if there had been just one that was an obvious lieutenant, I probably would have gone for it because I have the tools to do that. In this case, the 2 of them far enough apart means I don't really ever feel like going for them. Nestled in this corner, we have the Evo Hacker behind this tree line. The trees are just being played as solid in this particular case. They just add a nice je ne sais quoi to the forest table. You have these kind of alpine trees. And then the Long Ya is deployed in range to reload or get Evo support from the Evo Hacker. With the hideout hanging out nearby, it's also a piece that can be reloaded. Otherwise, there is just a mess of camouflage markers. They are a mix of Mimetism 0 and Mimetism 3. And by the end of Chris's deployment and his first order count, I was able to puzzle out what was going on. Prior to that, there was just enough obfuscation that you could only kind of tell certain things. For example, it was pretty obvious that this camouflage marker here would be the Long Ya's mine, but I could not guarantee based on the troop count and the SWC count that it wasn't, for example, Major Luma. I was 95% confident that it wasn't, but on the 5% chance that it was, didn't want to deal with that as a possibility, and so certain deployment decisions were based on that. In practice, what we actually have are a Beast Hunter over here, the Zensha Hacker over here, a Gudan back here behind this building, watching the close assault, another Gudan over here. This one's fairly obvious because of where it is, the Libertos. The Libertos' position here is obvious. The reason why is that it is too far forward to be a Gudan, and there are already 2 Gudan that are visible, which means that this is obviously the mine. So that much, like these 3 pieces here, I could tease out. The rest was, there's probably something dangerous under these, but I'm not exactly sure what. The count of troops also says that if this is a mine, there is something coming in from off-field or hidden. Tiger Soldier, I know what Chris likes. But if it's not a mine, it could also be real. But I'm going to act on the 95% likelihood, not the 100% likelihood that it is a mine. But it is just going to be a mine faking out from the little pop-up robot. Now, my deployment takes a little bit of time to figure out, but I do have the luxury of 2 reserve drops thanks to the Strategos Lieutenant, which are going to be Andromeda and the Posthumans. Posthumans as a reserve drop has been a classic since time immemorial, and means that the total number of models I get to reserve is 5, which is pretty good. That's a pretty large number of reserve drops. In terms of the actual deployment, from top to bottom, we have the total reaction bot hanging out behind this wall. It's doing a couple of things. The first thing is it's watching my deployment space. I do not want to be jumped by a total reaction bot, because I haven't, don't be jumped by a Tiger Soldier, sorry. Because I have an obvious lieutenant, which will be the Shukra, who is hanging out in here. I want the Shukra to be as covered as possible, because I don't want something like a Lushing or a Tiger Soldier landing and killing it, because it is obvious and vulnerable. Because it's obvious and vulnerable, I have to protect it, and so we protect it with a lot. If I need to, I could theoretically play through a turn of Lost Lieutenant with this list, but I don't want to do that, and so I'm defending the Shukra kind of maximally. We then have the Haris team of the Bounty Hunter, John Hawkwood, and the Motorized Bounty Hunter. The Motorized Bounty Hunter is over here and has rolled up nothing much. The regular Bounty Hunter is hanging out quite close to the Shukra Consultant and has +4 armor. That's pretty cool. And then John Hawkwood is on the rooftop here, nestled in amongst these signs. Now, being in amongst these signs has a couple of important effects. The first is that he's got a nice line of fire down this corridor here. Remember, at this point where I deploy him, the Yanho does not yet exist. And he's got a nice line of fire down sort of like this space here on this approach, but he's not watching this part of the table, which means that if this is Major Luna, I'm not going to get done by her, because Luna is one of the pieces that can theoretically threaten John Hawkwood, and I don't want any of that smoke. We then have a war correspondent fairly far back here. She's doing kind of the same thing, sort of just some kind of long lines of fire. Mostly, however, she's another 360 visor model that is watching the potential approaches and landing points to my Shukra Consultant, because I don't want my Shukra Consultant, once again, getting jumped by an airborne trooper. We've then got a couple of flash pulse robots, one back here, just offering repeater area against intrusions. The Probot is back here, but I have plans to watch it to make sure it is safe. People often put Evo hackers in positions like this Evo hacker here, for example. If I had a combat jump troop that was willing to make the run on it, it's surprisingly vulnerable. They're often by themselves, but I have plans to overwatch this one, which will be post-humans when they arrive. We have the 3-person Haris team of the Dakini, Deva, and Danavis spread a little bit out. The Dakini is here sort of watching these approaches. Not ideal for heavy machine gun, but I don't think there's anything that can... I've got plans, again, to defend, and I don't think there's anything that threatens the... Like, it's just picket firepower. It's easy to recover the Dakini if it goes down. The Deva is nestled in behind this little console with her shotgun, anything that's really trying to close assault, like a Shaolin monk, for example. And then the Danavis is a bit further back. The Danavis is the most valuable because she has the pitcher. There is a little bit of awkwardness with this fire team, which is that if I want to reload the Danavis, I need to get it sort of like back toward the Probot. But again, we're mostly adopting tactics here to defend against jump troops. And the secondary defense against jump troops comes with the reserve drops, which puts down the 3 posthumans and Andromeda. I have a look once the Yanho drops. Like, is there anywhere cool that I can put Andromeda? There's not. There's nowhere that it's worth making the YOLO play for. And so I do what I do with her otherwise in these situations going second, which is just that she's a defensive piece. There is no way to approach her on this table without walking into guard distance, unless you were to like really, like if you were to walk all the way out here out of cover, then you would potentially be able to approach her, but even then it's unlikely, and she could do dodges along the way. Basically, she's very difficult to attack from this angle. She just kind of neatly pinches off this part of the board. Sometimes she could get a dodge 4 inches. She dodges pretty far on a dodge with zone of control if she needed to, but just good defensive piece, and she can move out later. She's also going to be my key ops this game because she's nice and durable, and so if she does nothing other than score a bunch of points over the course of the game, totally fine with that. For the post-humans, the engineer comes down here. It will be in range to support the Dakini, but it's also watching this part of the table, which means that the Probot is protected if anything was to try and come after it using jetpacks. The Mark II is deployed right on the 24-inch line here. It's able to just move around. Now, this is actually a really stupid position for it, which you may already realize why, but if you don't, you will one order into my opponent's turn. And then the Mark V, the forward observer, is hanging out just behind this building here. There's a little spot where he's nice and in cover, and so he's just watching sort of like these lines here. Again, this is just picket firepower. I'm pretty happy using the 13-point forward observer post-human just as a disposable ARO piece, because it is very cheap. It's actually annoyingly durable with Armor 3 BTS 3, a Whip 15 Flash Pulse, etc. It's just a really, really good picket piece and tremendous value. So Chris generates his orders, and his orders are split pretty evenly across two pools, and because of that, I'm comfortable taking one order away from each. And this is going to knock a little bit of the wind out of his sails. It's going to be kind of difficult for him to really convincingly attack, but he does have one very easy, like just optimal, let's get this kill particular move, which is to just move the Weibing forward. Moves it forward into this nook and is immediately in zone of control of this post-human. Now, if he declares Censor, he will discover me with a 95% likelihood, so I drop the post-human out of camouflage to declare Oblivion. This is one of the ways that you can deal with being approached by repeater remotes, except that in this case, there is an engineer literally right behind. So it's trivial for Chris to repair this if I Oblivion it, but I have to take the attempt, because otherwise he will just discover me for free, thanks to Censor. As it happens, I just whiff the attack entirely, so he proceeds straight onto the hideout and proceeds to drop Trinity through a repeater into my post-human. This was 100% avoidable. I just needed to think about this and not put the post-human there. As it is, I lucked out. I didn't luck out, like I took a wound, but I only took a wound, went into no wound incap, and was able to guts back just out of position, just out of the repeater area, but literally only just. If Chris had wanted to, he could potentially have pursued there. He didn't, and I think he probably should have, frankly. It would have been just a little bit difficult. He would have needed to move the Weibing around here and then potentially have Cockram in place, because I would have gotten another chance to Oblivion, which could have started sapping orders, but I think it would probably have been worth it for the kill on the post-human. However, it is worth noting that every post-human, like as long as one post-human is alive, I still have the post-human's order. This is one of the wonderful things about post-humans. They are disgustingly good as a troop type. And so if Chris spends his entire first turn killing post-humans, I'm actually not too cut up about that, but I would rather it live. In this case, it does. But there was a line in which Chris could have continued to push the offensive and potentially gotten the kill, which would have seen Crit Cockram potentially do some good. Instead, Chris elects to just pin the post-human in. Okay, cool, it's revealed. The Libertos is just going to walk around, get up here. It moves up on the second short skill. The post-human declares Discover and succeeds, and the Libertos is just like, cool, I'm your problem now. I will stop you from doing anything particularly finicky in your turn. We're just buds up here on the rooftop. You now have to spend orders trying to deal with me. And this is okay. There was a time, I think this is a bit of a muscle memory play, because there was a time when the Libertos would have been very annoying for post-human to deal with, but it no longer has a template weapon, and so she has Mimetism 6. However, if she goes on him inactive, he can do things like place a shock mine, and that is actually annoying for her to deal with. So it's the use of one irregular and one regular order, just to make her kind of not a problem for subsequent turns. Otherwise, Chris spends a fair bit of time on his first turn, just sort of like doing the thing that people with drop troops do, which is they just walk to your side of the table and they just look at it for a little bit, and then they, like they scratch their chin and then they walk back. Then they spend a few orders on things, then they walk back around. And there's just no obvious spot, and I will be doing this in Chris's first turn. Where I just look and I'm like, yeah, no, not yet. It's not quite time. Soon, but not yet. And so Chris he tries to scout out the drop troop landing position, but there isn't one. So he just plays a scenario first turn otherwise. And between the Weibing, the Beast Hunter, the Zencha, etc., he's able to get two buttons pressed. So this button, and those are permanent points in Superiority, like Supremacy. Buttons can be owned by both players, but they can't be flipped back and forth. The Zencha gets back into a nice safe position. The Beast Hunter starts going on a run, gets discovered on the way through. There's just slightly too many ARO pieces, so it just recamouflages back here in a position where it can be annoying to be in future. This ultimately means that Chris goes through his first turn not really being able to land too much damage, other than the engagement between the Yan-Ho and John Hawkwood, which actually happens fairly early after the hacking duel. I mentioned that the Yan-Ho is one of the few pieces that can safely engage John Hawkwood, and that is indeed true. Now, the deployment position here is as good as I could hope for. It is at 0 rangeban for the Yanho +3 for me, which means the Yanho is spooling up on 8s to John Hawkwood's 13s. But the thing about the Yanho is that it is just about immune to John Hawkwood's gun, and it can just fire a whole lot of dice. And in this instance, the first face-to-face roll, 5 dice downrange, 3 dice back, the Yanho wins the face-to-face roll and wounds John Hawkwood. And I have to make the call at that juncture, do I want to leave John Hawkwood there? Because there is a potential, right? There is the potential I can maybe scupper Chris's entire turn, having him waste lots of face-to-face rolls, because it's not easy for the Yanho to win the face-to-face roll. It's just that it's not likely to be hurt if it loses, unlike a tag, for example. But in this case, I make the call that I want John Hawkwood to live. So this is kind of like a disappointing turn for John, where he takes a wound and gutses into total cover. He's going to actually duck behind this secondary billboard. Absorbing literally one order from the opponent and taking a wound in the process and doing nothing else is not the best outcome for John, but that's fine. There are many games in which he will carry. This isn't one of them, and we move on. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this defensively as a first turn. Yes, Chris has put some scenario runs on the board. Yes, he's moved pieces up to contest certain space. This is superiority. You need to make sure he's got a quite good list as it happens, with the exception of Crit Cockram, for basically playing superiority well, because all of that camouflage forward sages your points, which means you can score zones quite easily. And his defenses are set up, but he hasn't done terribly much damage to me. Because he hasn't done terribly much damage to me, I'm staged well for a good offense, and can start looking at how I can put points in zones myself to start winning the game. The only other things to note that happen are, as mentioned, because there's the attack-aware order, etc. on the Weibing and Crit, those pieces just relocate. The Shaolin Monk also uses her irregular order to just jump back to the position, or a position that she's kind of safe, after impetuousing forward. So just back to reasonable defensive play, although we are going to see that Cockram's position is perhaps not going to be the best. I'm going to actually see that here at the beginning of my first turn. This is the terrible lure of the Feuerback. Crit Cockram has moved back and around to here using his NCO order and his tactical awareness order. I think it took 2 for him to get where he is. And he's got a Feuerback, which makes him an ARO piece, right? He's a heavy infantry. He's got 2 wounds. He's not good enough to do anything. This is why the Feuerback is a trap, one of the reasons. He's just not good enough to win face-to-face rolls with it, in active or reactive. A Feuerback is a weapon that is only good when it has significant mods and significant bonuses that lets it actually connect with that good ammunition type that it has. When you don't have those, you are not material armed with anything much better than a Flash Pulse, because you're not winning face-to-face rolls. And we're going to see that in play here. And so in terms of my turn, even though I have taken wounds, I've got a wounded Posthuman, I've got a wounded John Hawkwood, and Chris has a bunch of scenario runs on the board with 2 objectives controlled and lots of points in zones, I have my full order pool, and I have everything alive, which means we have full bottle to make attacks. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to impetuous the motorized bounty hunter around. The beast hunter declines to reveal itself, so we just keep moving, but we end up positioned about here, then spend our irregular order, discover, shoot. The discover has a 65% chance to reveal, which means that Chris has to decide what to do. If he dodges, I will submachine gun him, so he just flamethrowers me, I chain cold him, and both models sign a suicide pact. I am totally fine with this as a trade. Chris has not really spent any orders on the Beast Hunter, but it's trading 1 irregular order of mine for 1 irregular order of his, the one that it spent. I spent 9 points, he spent 17, no problem, trade up. The remainder of engagements this turn are not going to be trades, however, because the Evo Hacker is going to put support wear on the Dakini, and the Dakini's eyes are going to flash red and it's going to kill the world. In terms of the engagements that it takes, the first thing that happens is that it stands up. When it stands up, it comes in range of the Yanho. Yanho returns fire. Now, the Yanho it's only going to be hitting on 11s because there's mimetism on the Dakini, but it's tough. It's armor 5, it's in cover. If the Dakini hits it, it needs to roll 13s or less to survive. The Dakini puts an absolute barrage of fire into it and knocks it unconscious in 1 order. Okay, that's a really good start. That's a really good start. No problem. The Dakini is in duo now because the Denarvis has fallen out of the link. That's okay. The Dakini has kind of come up and around. It's going to prone up into the building. The way that we play in order to access rooftops in these buildings, you just declare a short movement skill while in contact with a door. Takes you to the rooftop immediately above. The Dakini is now prone here. It's going to crawl prone 3 inches this way and stand at the end of the movement, which will put it in line of fire of Crit Cockram, but not the Weibing. It will then engage Crit Cockram and put him all the way to dead in 1 order. Now, this is not a surprising face-to-face roll. Crit is firing back on 10s. I'm rolling 5 dice on 14s, and he's only armor 3. Crit Cockram is bad at this kind of thing. Reminder, do not take the flare back. But with Crit Cockram down, okay, well the Dakini can just lean out a little bit, engage, and also destroy the Weibing. With the Weibing down, I'm now pretty safe to move with the Posthuman, which engages and kills the Libertos. The Libertos should have just laid a mine in this particular case. Chris went for the shotgun on the grounds that if he got lucky, it was a big trade up. But I am rolling 2 dice 19s, and he is rolling 1 dice 11s, and that's a bad trade. So we've just knocked out 4 pieces on this side of the table, and that's gonna be pretty decisive, actually. I don't even really have, in terms of the orders that I spent, I don't have enough orders left to really step on the gas after this. So we're just going to kind of try and get some scenario runs on the board. Andromeda is going to move up and around here. She's going to end up nestled somewhere like this, which will put her just barely inside Chris's half of the table. She sees enough points, particularly in combination with the Posthuman, to secure this zone here, which is big money. That's going to score me the first 2 points for zone control, which is going to be a particularly big deal. In Combat Group 2, we're going to have the Posthuman run around here and fail to press the button. And I don't actually have enough orders after that to do anything else. The Posthuman will end up nestled back behind this doorway. But even though it is a 15 to press the button, I do make the call to recamouflage with the last order in that group, my Posthuman hacker, just because there is a hideout here. He could walk up these stairs, he could fire a pitcher, and then put the killer hacker down pretty badly. That's a play that if Chris had more orders, he might have done last turn, but he elected to get points on the board instead. I do, however, have just a couple of orders left in Combat Group 2 that I can do like 1 or 2 things with. Combat Group 1, whatever. The Zayan Rebot decides it's going to be funny, and it moves up to here and then climbs up onto this rooftop and discovers the Zensha. It fails the discover, but it is now a Zayan Rebot on top of one of the tallest buildings on the table, which is very cute. We pay 1 extra point in Aleph for climbing plus on our remotes, and this occasionally lets you do things like this. Now, you might say, that means that if the Zayan gets put down, it's going to be very hard for you to recover. Yes, you would think that. Let's play on into a couple of turns. Overall, though, this is a very good turn. I've scored 2 points. I haven't pressed any buttons, but I have killed 5 of Chris's 15 troopers, and I've lost effectively nothing apart from a motorized bounty hunter. So very strong attritional play. The Yanho dying rather than like taking a wound and gutsing prone was unlucky. Crit Cockram was kind of the expected result. So some of these casualties were avoidable, some of them were bad luck. Nevertheless, a very good offensive turn and almost backbreaking. So for Chris's part, it's now or never now. It's time to bring on the Tiger Soldier, the ace up the hole, the ace in the hole, the card up the sleeve, and it will kind of faff around trying to fight Posthumans. There is unfortunately just not enough left in this part of the table here for Chris, like the bottom half of the table as we're viewing it. There's just not enough left for Chris to meaningfully contest the forces that I have there. He's got a Gudan trooper, it can't fight Andromeda, it can't fight any of this stuff. If the Yanho had been less unlucky, and it absolutely did get unlucky, there would be some positions that can be taken. Maybe getting it down, maybe dropping into suppressive fire at a range band where Andromeda can't just easily close on it, but I have a repeater here for that particular instance because the Denarvis had some spare orders. But as it is, he's just in trouble. This part of the table downwards is basically, it's lost to Aleph, which means, and Chris correctly identifies, that his path out of the game, or at least 2 more points, is to play here, because I have fewer pieces here, and he can potentially get something of a win. And so what happens is that the Zensha and the Tiger Soldier turn up and play, and they are ultimately going to end up being stonewalled a little bit by the Posthuman. Chris makes the scenario play. He goes for the Posthuman, tries to get the kill, doesn't quite do it, presses a button, orders run out a little bit. The Tiger Soldier turns up and isn't quite able to kill anything that it particularly wants to. The one good kill that gets made is that the Tiger Soldier, when it turns up, it walks on out of line of sight of the Zayan Rebot. 1 or 2 orders later, cleanly immobilizes it. Support wears the Longya, and the Longya pops up on it and drops it to unconscious. The Longya actually lands 2 Panzerfaust hits, but I am relatively lucky in my save, so the Zayan just goes unconscious rather than dead. It is down, though, however, and it's down on a rooftop. Let's see what we can do about that in subsequent turns. That is the only kill Chris is going to get this turn, however. He will target, he will wound the Posthuman, but he won't kill it, and ultimately the Zensha pulls back around to here, and the Tiger Soldier hangs out behind this building here, in the knowledge that with the motorized bounty hunter dead, there's not really necessarily anything in place that can easily go after either of these 2 pieces. And collectively, they are a lot of points. There's not really an easy way for me to contest this zone without exposing to vulnerability pieces that maybe I don't necessarily want to expose to vulnerability, which means we need to draw a resource from somewhere else. And this means, finally, it is Garuda time. Now, in practice, I had another line of play if I needed it. If I didn't have the Garuda in this list, the line of play would be that the Danavis jumps up onto this building and then just fires pitches in this direction, and the Deva then takes over and tries to fight both hackers at once. This is a pretty manageable line of play. I've got 4 shots on 11 to land pitches down into that area. And the Deva has a pretty good chance of fighting all of these different pieces. I don't love the idea of fighting both the Tiger Soldier and the Zencha at the same time, particularly since the Zencha has Trinity, but it's a possibility. You could risk it, you could split dice, etc. However, instead, we've got plenty of orders, so we're going to do something different. We're going to bring down the Garuda. It's finally time. Now, we just raw dog the landing because I'm only looking to land it basically down here away from the Tiger Soldier. If it fails, I'll just spend 1 order walking it in from the back table edge, and that's fine. The reason why I'm landing it here is so that it is in zone of control of the Lamed Rebot that I've got sitting behind this crate, and because it's in zone of control of the Lamed Rebot, I can give it support wear. And this is immediately one of those things where the Garuda behaves, and it's going to behave this turn, an awful lot like a vehicle. However, unlike a vehicle, it can fit in more places, it can be given support wear, it's easy to repair. If it gets, for example, bricked by one of the hackers, if I misjudge distance, I can just repair it rather than a vehicle which is screwed because it is literally impossible, apart from declaring a reset, to get a vehicle out of the isolated or immobilized states because you can't physically touch it with an engineer. And so the rest of this turn is going to be the Garuda song and dance. And what we are going to see is just how much maneuverability 10 inches of super jump jet propulsion is. Even though we have there is a Tiger Soldier hacker here and there is a Zencha hacker here, the angles with which you can slice the pie when you can move 5 inches around, 5 inches back from a starting position gives you such a long leash. And like, we know this with vehicles, right? We have seen vehicles do this. The difference is that vehicles are just much more difficult to protect in active turn, and because they are so physically large, you just have less control. Because a Dakini is silhouette 2, it is the most flexible silhouette size in the game, and I am able to just slice the pie back and forth between the Zencha and the Tiger Soldier as I want. Now, the first few fights are going to have to be with the Zencha, but I just have those all my way. The Zencha is trying to engage me with a boarding, like, it just can't engage with a boarding shotgun at 18 inches, and so I put hit after hit into it, don't actually kill it, but I force it back, and as I force it back, I'm then able to engage the Tiger Soldier. The Tiger Soldier we put down nice and cleanly. It tries to return fire with the combi rifle, and even though it's got mimetism, I have marksmanship. I'm hitting on 9s. No, actually, I think I can even get out of cover. But so I'm hitting on 9s. No, sorry, range. I'm hitting on 12s. It's hitting on 13s, but I have 4 dice and it has 1. We put the Tiger Soldier down, and then we call in Speedball. We call in Speedball, we're going to call in an auto repair kit on the ground, and then the Garuda is going to jump up, pick the auto repair kit up, land next to the Zayan Rebot on this like 8-inch tall building, which it can do because it has tennis and super jump, and repair the Zayan Rebot. Then it's going to continue jumping down here, and as it zooms through the air, it's going to get line of sight on the Zencha, and I think to take this fight, it actually like zooms out this way almost to the table edge and then zooms back, and it gets this like perfect line down against the Zencha out of cover and finally puts it down. Now, this has taken multiple orders because getting the Zencha like to guts around to that position has taken time, but then we zoom down onto this building, which we can do because 10 inches is a really long way, come up and around this way, and then we do the 5 inches up and 5 inches back, and we get a line into the hideout. Now, in this case, the hideout does have cover. I put 4 shots into it. I think I hit 3 times, passes all of the saves, and he guts back, but then we zoom up and around this way, and we take out the Longya. And one of the other things about this movement is because it's 10 inches, or it's a 5-inch leash, or further if you're willing to end your position like like further away from where you started, which gives you sort of like a 5, a 6, a 7-inch leash. And because it's jet propulsion movement, you can do things like against the Longya, for example, I wanted to engage it within 16 inches. Spitfire rangebands are pretty flexible. So the path in that case was like around this way in order to catch it inside of 16 inches. Against the Hideout and against the Zencha, I wanted to go further away. So you sort of go up and backwards and then come in and around. And because you can change your trajectory in midair, all of these things are legal. Now, you couldn't do this necessarily as easily with something like a 4-inch model making 6-inch super jumps, but when you have just that much further of a leash and you have the forgiving Spitfire range bands, it's just really strong. Now, could you theoretically do some of this with a red eye? Some of it, yeah, but you couldn't realistically fit a red eye on this rooftop. There's an obstacle up there. You can't fit a Silhouette 7 base, except like maybe in one spot sometimes, perhaps not even then. And so you just have all of this flexibility with the Garuda. And the Garuda just went absolutely off. We saw it kill 3 models. Now, realistically, I should have pulled it back, but at this point, I was pretty sure Chris was very close to retreat, so I went into Suppressive Fire mostly just as a flex. The posthuman does at this point finally press this button, which puts 1 run on the table for me, but this is a ground control scenario where you need points in zones, and I have points in zones again, and Chris realistically does not have enough points left in the entire game at this juncture to meaningfully contest. Too much is dead, too much is broken. And so this is the beginning of Chris's 3rd turn now, but it is for practical purposes going to be the last turn in the game. He's going to make some attack runs with some Gudan, and with the hideout he's going to have a crack, but it's not going to be enough. He will put the Dakini, the Garuda down. That will eventually go down to a Gudan engagement. Followed up, the Gudan will zapper it, and he'll follow up with the hideout. But that's the only kill. And I could just as easily, I could have had the Garuda come down here where it would have been totally safe. That is not enough to swing the game, and so for the remainder of the game, what I'm going to be doing is just pressing 2 more buttons and getting forward. I already have basically Andromeda has moved forward, I think, a little bit here, but we've got the scenarios showing it sort of like she like this the table the quarter is like there. She'll move out and around this way and then press this button, and she'll have like 7 orders to do it. Dodges a mine, presses this button. I will get this button pressed with the posthuman, and that's it. That's all of the points that I can score. So that ends the score for OSS, 10-3 for Yuching, which is a decisive OSS victory off the back of a number of pieces, but it is, again, worth noting that Chris brought a list to play Panic Room, and happily, the bulk of the list serves pretty well in a scenario like this. The Yuching Camo Spam archetype, this was an imperfect example of it, but it is good in ground control scenarios. It just needed, like, a Zensha Mine Layer, for example, upgrade the Tiger Soldier to a Lushing, a shooting star, which is much better at like landing and trying to penetrate hacking networks, sort of the firewall, etc. I wouldn't necessarily want to YOLO it through this list's hacking arrows, but it is something that you can do. And probably give serious consideration to replacing, as I mentioned, Chris Cockram for a Hayate. He costs literally exactly the same, and yes, okay, it's not a specialist, but you are more or less fine for specialist in this scenario with the tools that you've got. In fact, you are fine in this scenario with the tools that you've got, and the Hayate is just a tremendously well-performing piece that gives you a tactical awareness, just about a Yanhuo with tactical awareness for cheaper points. So plenty of improvements we can make to Chris's list, which we're going to basically not harangue him too harshly for, because he turned up expecting to play one scenario and then played another. Do very much appreciate that I got to have time for a game. Wasn't expecting to get one in this Wednesday, so really appreciate it. And of course, he's a wonderful person, and it's always, just like most of my locals, it's absolutely fantastic to get to play them, but Chris in particular is a special treat. Now, in terms of overall conclusions about the OSS list, as I mentioned, I iterated on it a little bit before this battle report, managed to have some play with it, and apart from the fact that I think I would like one more troop, one more order in the second combat group, like maybe 2, you could move the Shukra, but I think just moving a single Lamed Rebot into combat group 2, or even potentially the war correspondent, might give me what I want in terms of just enough. It's because the posthumans, because they have so much play, the posthumans having the orders for them is the main thing. It's just being able to spend orders on the Mark V to go and do interesting things, spend orders on the Mark II, etc. I feel like I need 1, maybe 2, but mostly 1 more order in Combat Group 2. So compared to the list we showed off at the beginning of this battle report, maybe just flip 1 Lamed into the second group. Otherwise, I'd feel comfortable recommending this. It's got a ton of fun pieces. It's got a ton of pieces that can individually put the game on their backs. And that's a very cool style of list to play. Now, that's going to wrap up this battle report. Tristan, Noble Wizard, the 2 channel supporters who requested OSS and OSS with Garudas. Hope you've enjoyed this battle report. Hope you've enjoyed the showcase and discussion of some of the power that the Garuda has. It's a really cool piece, and I will probably be returning to this because this was a very fun list to play. Otherwise, as a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. When I am looking for video topics, battle report inspirations, ideas of things to play, I consult requests first from channel supporters. So always welcome people who are willing to support the channel. It allows me to continue to do the things that I'm doing. And of course, you're a constant source of inspiration with your requests for battle reports, topics, and videos. In terms of videos to come, there will probably be some Conquest content coming up, but it will not interrupt Infinity content is the basic plan. I'm hoping to release, if I do Conquest content, hoping to release that as supplementary videos during the midweek, but we will see how it plays out. I've got a few different Infinity videos I want to make inside the next month, a mix of battle reports and introductory content for newer players. And so, with that said, we'll be back next week with more content. As always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.